Okay, guys, hello. Welcome to my talk. This is PWA with PWF. It's a little hard to say. I will repeat, sorry if you were at my talk yesterday, I will repeat the same. I am Ignacio Anaya. I am from Argentina. This is me playing hockey. I play hockey, so when I'm not coding and traveling, I am doing this. And that's my Twitter handle, so if you have questions or suggestions or whatever, you can reach me there. I am JavaScript engineer at Bloq. Bloq is a company that provides blockchain solutions. I am ambassador at Auth0. Auth0 provides a single sign-on security service. It's pretty cool if you don't want to deal with authentication and save some time and money. And I am the organizer of Buenos Aires, that is the Vue.js meetup of Buenos Aires, Argentina. So not sure if it's often or common to you to travel there, but if you're there and you want to say hello, you're welcome. So having a little delay with this. Okay. Let's start with a few questions. How many of you have worked with Vue.js before? Okay. Good. Good for you. And how many of you have worked with progressive web apps? Great. So this is a talk about PWA and how can Vue.js could help in the process or the development of those applications. And I would like to start with something that I call the subway dilemma. So how many of you have experienced frustrations or couldn't use your application or an application properly during the subway? Okay. So the idea behind the PWA is to solve this issue, to avoid this kind of problems when you as user are in a different context as the normal that you used to use your application. So in general, when we are in the subway, we don't think in hitting a URL because it will not work. And that is something that shouldn't happen. Okay? If I am reading a newspaper in the web, I should be able to see the latest content or the latest cached content. Okay? I should at least be able to do that. Probably I can get the latest news, but I should be able, or I must be able, to see the cached content. So this is the idea, or the main idea behind these apps. The most important thing to understand is that those apps are not, the PWA is not a framework, it's not a language, it's not a technology. It's more like a set of tools, standards, and best practices that we need to apply. And it's important to understand that those practices could change in the future. So we need to be updated, and because the browsers change, because the API changed, because the specifications change. So the things that we are doing today could be different at the things that we are going to do in the future. So a PWA, it's a web-based application. It's an application with web technologies, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, with the idea to bring the user a native experience or the same experience that they used to have with the native applications in the mobile devices with different operating systems. So it's basically an application with a link, in other words. Yeah, it's just that. We can say that it's, spoilers. We can say that it's progressive because they don't behave always in the same way. They improve with time, they improve with the device. So if I have better hardware, I can bring the user better experience, but I always need to ensure to have a basic functionality. I can't show the Chrome dinosaur to the user all the time because something went wrong. So this is what we need to achieve. Get better or similar experience as we have without connectivity or without the ideal scenario. And there is a gap right now between mobile applications and native applications, and the PWAs are here to try to fix that gap or to resolve that gap. Basically because the browser is becoming the main actor in the mobile world. What I think is that the browser could be the future for mobile development, or at least could be one of the possible tools to rely for mobile development. And I would like the idea to bet in browsers because we don't have to deal with the stores. So can you imagine a world without stores? Could be something like this. I mean, in iOS stores, Google Play stores, without dealing with the approval process, without dealing with the hard stuff to deploy new versions. So I think it will be better if we can develop our applications in the browser. So a PWA has a lot of features. The first one, progressive, we already talked about that. Second one should be responsive, should adapt to the different screen sizes. Technically, should adapt to all the screen sizes. And of course, should be network independent. We talk about that too. Should work offline or should offer some capabilities offline. Should be like an app or should behave like an app or should looks like an app. That is important, so we can trick the user that it's using a native application and not the web. Of course, we need to refresh the content. We need to update the content to get the new data, and always trying to deprecate the old cache or the old data. Need to be safe. Any application needs to be safe. Not sure why it's there. Should be discoverable, and that it's a good one because it's a great advantage through the natives applications. We cannot search content of a native application in Google, for example. So that it's a great point to use PWAs. We can crawl out content and we can get new users to our application through the indexers or through the bots. Should be re-engageable or engageable. And the idea is, OK, our user will use the application, but will access that one time, and we need to encourage the user to come again. So if the user used our app and couldn't convert, for example, if I am tweeting or I am in Twitter and I can't tweet, so the user will not probably come back to tweet again because it has a frustrating experience. So it should be something that the user wants to do again or use again. Should be installable, and this is something that it's pretty easy to do now. So we let the users create like a short, direct access to the screen, so can access to our application easily. And this is a good one too, it should be linkable. Right now it's pretty hard to share the state of an application among users. If one user wants to share a link with other user in an application, it's not so easy. And in the web should be easy because it's just a URL. We can share the URL to different users, and they can access or replicate the exact same content they are seeing. So some of the advantages are deploy and updates. It's really easy to deploy. Don't deal with stores. It's really easy to update. Don't deal with stores. We have the offline support. We have cross-device support. I mean, our PWA could work in mobile, could work in tablets, could work in desktop, in wearables, in smart TVs. Why not? So we have a bigger spectrum to support now. And we have one code source, probably with some if-else cases over there, but it's just one code source. So we don't have to deal with different code bases. It's more easy to maintain. It's more easy to develop. And by stores, this is really important for me. You don't have to deal with stores again. You don't need approval. You don't need to pay for that, and you can get more revenue for you. So far, so good. Let's say I convince you to use the PWAs. What can you use to develop them? So there are three important things. The first one is the web. So the browsers, the web, has a lot of capabilities right now that you can use to access APIs or OS OS features like media, like camera, like geolocation, like accelerometer, like Bluetooth. So in this page, what web can do today, you can check, depending on the browser, all the features or APIs that your browser support that let you build better user experience or let you use better OS capabilities in your web applications. There are a lot of things there that you don't probably know that exist, so it's cool to take a look there and see the powerful that we already have in the browsers now. The second thing is the web app manifest, and this is pretty easy. It's just a JSON file where you have some useful metadata. And this is more important when we are thinking to install the application. So there we can put information like the name of the app, the fav icons, or different kind of icons depending the OS or depending the device. Description, so it's just metadata that we put there to improve the installation of the application so the user can identify the application once it's installed. And the third one, the most important, is service workers, or our service workers. So how many of you know what is a service worker? OK, most of you. So basically, it's a script that runs in background. It's a different thread from the JavaScript event loop. It acts like a proxy between your application and the network, so it can intercept all the requests that your application makes to the network and check or decide what kind of content it's going to give in terms of that response or in terms of that request. I think it's the most important part. It's the most important part of all of this because it's probably the key part of the offline support in JavaScript. But it has some limitations. It only works in HTTPS, but it's 2018, so no problem with that. We can't manipulate the DOM in a service worker, and everything there should be async. We cannot do sync operations inside the service worker. So this is how it works. As I said before, it's like a middleware interceptor between your page or the browser and the network. So you are going to request something to your API. So the service worker will intercept that request, will check if it can understand the response or has the response in the cache. If not, we'll go to the network, we'll get the response, we'll get back the response to the page, and we'll cache that. So the next page, the user makes the same request, or the browser makes the same request. The content is in the cache, so the service worker could decide not go to the network to get that and serve that from the cache. So the process is pretty straightforward. The main question was, a little months ago, are service workers ready? And the thing is, right now, they are. Basically, because some month ago, I think that iOS wasn't supporting that. But right now, we can. Actually, it's fully support. This is a real web page where you can go. And well, now the answer is yes. Some month ago it was no. But you can see there, besides that, you can see the support between browsers and the different, the different implementations or the latest new about the service workers. Let's talk about Fire. And Fire is basically the main concept that we have, or the set of 4 main concepts that we have behind the PWAs. The F is for fast. So in general, users abandon the sites because it takes a lot of time to load, especially the initial load. Besides that, when the page loads, they expect to behave fast too. So this is something that we need to take in mind. We need to try to reduce the initial time load, especially in single-page applications when we used to load everything at the beginning, that it's frustrating for the user. So we can use code splitting for that or some techniques to reduce that. And we also need to avoid those render issues. So our application should behave fluid during the user flow. So the I is for integrated. You could mind why is the dog there. So I try to use emojis for every title, and sometimes it's really hard to make it fit. So you just need to use your imagination. But in this case, the dog, it's because if it has 4 legs and a tail and it barks, it's a dog. So the same thing here. If the application behaves like a native application, for the user will be a native application. They don't care about the technology we use, the framework we use, or how it's been developed. Okay? They care about the app and that the app it's working okay. So if we can trick the user that it's using a native application, this is all that it matters. Okay? We can pick the language we want, the technology we want, but it should behave and integrate with the OS. The R, it's for reliable. Basically, the idea of reliable is to be always available, depending without matter the context or the scenario or the connectivity. Just keep your application up and running always. Optimize resources. Don't use battery or user resources for everything. So try to take care in mind and think about the users. Let the app be shareable so the user can reproduce through the link the exact behavior or content of the app. And I also think that the R it's for for resilient, because the application should change or adapt to the different context, to the different scenarios. So this is something important for me. And the last one, it's engaging. And well, as we said before, If I am Twitter, I want to tweet, I need to provide that experience to the user. I need to encourage people to use the application, but I need to encourage people to come back to the application. We can use some features like web notification. It's a good resource to get news or give news to the user to come back, but we don't need to abuse that because the user will get tired of our notifications and will abandon the usage too. Okay, so how can Vue.js could help with that? First of all, Vue.js has a great developer experience ecosystem, so you have a bunch of tools there that you can use to develop any kind of application, but especially you have some specific tools to help you to build progressive web apps. So first of all, we have the Vue CLI. Vue CLI, it has a new version that it's pretty cool, where we can generate new projects, and we can create projects using plugins. So instead of creating a project with a fixed configuration, we just set the name of the project, and then we pick different configurations from different plugins. So we can use TypeScript or Progressive Web App or different kind of plugins to compose our applications in the startup process. It's pretty easy. You just install it with npm, and then you need to use Vue create, the name of the project, to start creating it. Internally, we're going to use the PWA plugin from Vue.js. We don't need to install anything because all the plugins are downloaded from GitHub. So, or internally, I don't really know if they are internally in the CLI or you can download that. But the CLI will take care of that. It's pretty clean. And if you already have a project using the Vue CLI 3, you can integrate the PWA plugin to your existing application. So you don't need to create a new one and migrate all the code. You just run this command, vue add, and it will take care to create the boilerplate that you need for the PWA. Okay, this is a simple demonstration of how you create that, especially for those that are new to Vue.js. You select the plugins there, then you pick the linter or some configuration stuff, and that's it. If you saw that in the first question, you can pick among different plugins, but you can select more than one. So that is great. You can compose your application using several plugins. And this is what you get. This is basically the same structure that you get with every Vue.js project, but you get 3 particular files. The first one is the manifest.json that I mentioned before, where you can set the metadata of the app. The second one, it's a file called register service worker. So it's the file that Vue.js will use to load our service worker and where we can use later to debug. And the third one is actually a file that I add that it's called vue.config.js. That file, it's optional, but you can use it to override the default settings of the CLI. Especially there are settings that you can use for PWA. So this is the anatomy of the file. It's just a JavaScript file where you export an object. And you have this PWA object where internally you can set the different properties that you want to override. The first one are more related to metadata. And the second ones are related to the service worker configuration. So something important is that this is not working. OK. This CLI, or technically this plugin, it's using internally this tool that is called Workbox. Anyone have heard about it? OK. So this is a set of libs and modules from Google to add offline support to our application. It basically removes the boilerplate that we have when we are developing or working with service workers. It's pretty easy to use. It's like a library or something that we use on top of the service workers. And we have 2 kind of modes in this library. One of them is generate SW. So this is the default one. This is the easiest one. So if you are starting with this kind of applications, it's probably the one for you. And it's basically generate a new service worker file anytime that you rebuild your web app. So as I said before, this is the default behavior. If we don't specify something in the configuration file, we will get this behavior. And the other one, it's the inject manifest. This is more advanced. It's more hard to set up or maybe to understand. But the good thing about this is that you have more control, you have more customization of what you are doing. So if you are a more advanced user or you need more from outside the box, this is probably what you need to use. Basically, it creates a copy of an existing service worker file with a pre-cache manifest. So it's something that you can get more control or add more features than the default behavior. Then we have this register service worker library that it's basically the file that I mentioned before. And inside this file, Vue.js, it's loading the service worker. And we have different hooks or events that are pretty useful for debugging or development, where we can add code in those different hooks and check what is going on with our stuff. So it's pretty useful, and this is the file that will take care of the service worker registration. So this is a demo of a single-page app that I want to show you. It's a video. But this is an app that I'm serving now in my local host. You can see that it's online now, but I put it in later. I will put it in offline mode, and I will be able to reload the page. I will not get the dinosaur. I will get the content cache, and I will be able to use it again. If you can see here, now all this context, all these files are served from the service worker. So when the app is online, probably this is served from the network, or at least the first time. But now those are from the service worker. Another useful thing that we can use is code splitting. And code splitting is great to reduce the initial load and to improve the performance of our application. Basically, because we will reduce the chunk files. We will have, it's a technique to, instead of having one big file or one big JavaScript file, have different files with a small size. So especially when we're working with single-page applications, it's pretty useful. And we can do some code splitting in Vue.js using async components. So basically here, what we are doing is loading the main component or the initial component as part of this chunk, but this simple line of code here will make that this component will be loaded in a lazy mode. So only will be loaded when it's needed. So using that, we can reduce the chunk size, and then later we will improve the load time of the application. Another way to use async components is to create the same pattern in our reusable components that we have, like a modal. So in this case, the modal will not be loaded until we need it. It's basically the same pattern. So using that, we can help our application to improve a little bit. This is a funny quote. It's more related to naming things, right? But, well, there are only two hard things in computer science: cache invalidation and naming things. So the second one, it's really, really hard. But the first one, it's important too. And we can use Webpack or our bundle system to help on that, basically using the versioning. When you create the files, each file should be created with a version, that number, between the name of the file and the JavaScript extension, or the CSS extension or whatever extension. But basically, that number will help the browser and the service worker identify if the file is new, it's a new version, if it needs to retrieve that from the server, from the service worker. So this is something that in general we have like a default behavior from Webpack or the bundle system. But if not, we need to take in mind and use it. And it's important to test locally, the final application. So you can use Vue.js to do that too. We will, first of all, install a static server like serve. The second step is to build the application using the build command. And the third step is to serve that distribution files. So we can test the application in Chrome. Using incognito mode, I always recommend to check that using incognito mode, especially because of the cache. So to avoid any kind of issues, just open one incognito mode tab, and let's try there. And all this information you can see here, it's information provided by Workbox. It will only be shown if you're running localhost, so don't worry about in production. Basically, you have information of what it's going to be served, or what it's been served by the service worker or by Workbox in this case, and identify what kind of content are you caching. It's very helpful, especially for debugging. And Another useful tool, it's Lighthouse. Anyone using Lighthouse? OK. So Lighthouse, it's part of the Chrome DevTools, and it's also a node module. It's great because it lets you audit your application. So you have it in Chrome if you're using Chrome. It lets you audit your application in terms of performance, accessibility, and PWA, probably another thing else. But you have like scores depending the things that you are doing good or not, and then you have some suggestions or best practices or tips that you can include in your application. As it's a node module, you can also integrate it as part of your CI. So if you are a very, prolix team that you need to keep your code or your base code running OK, following the best practices, you could integrate that with GitHub or with your CI to have, I don't know, maybe one specific score for each of the builds. So this is what I think it's a checklist that you need to follow if you want to create a PWA. I separate those items in two lists. Those are the ones, at least for me, with highest priority. The first one is, of course, offline support. The second one is that should work in all browsers. We need to guarantee a user experience in all the browsers. Should work in any context, without internet, without connection, with any device. So any kind of context we need to take in mind, and we need to make our application work in those contexts. If we have better resources, we can provide better UX. That it's OK, but better UX doesn't mean that in lower resources or normal hardware, I will provide a bad user experience. And well, I said before that, but HTTPS, it's really important. It's 2019. We have Let's Encrypt. It's easy. It's cheap. It's technically free to do that. So there's no reason to serve our applications in HTTP. Just always use HTTPS. So the second part of the list is metadata. We can provide that metadata for improved installation. We need to provide or to ensure a fast initial load. We need to make our application be fluid, avoid lags, avoid render issues, so avoid big lists, try to make it as native as possible for the user. And one page, one URL. This is important too, OK? Try to identify your content using URLs, using these unique identifiers where you can share that URL to the user and be sure that you can reproduce the same content. If you have time and money and you want to do more, you can do some advanced cache or advanced cache using resource hints, basically using pre-render, preload, those browser stuff that let you handle a little bit better the cache of the system. You can use post notification. I think it's a great feature especially to re-engage the users to reuse the web. Of course, responsive design or responsive design 100%. What I mean is that take in mind all the possible devices, wearables, smart TVs, laptops, on tablets, whatever. And should be SEO or SEM friendly. Okay, so something that could be this is an advantage from the PWS in terms of or in comparison with the normal apps. So I think it's important that we use it. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. There is a lot of behind it. So basically, I have some resources here. Workbox documentation, it's a great point to start, basically because you have guides and a lot of information there. This is a great course about service worker and how they work. It's a really recommended resource. Lighthouse documentation, it's good too, because you will get there the things that you need to add to your app to improve it. PWA stats, you can get some useful stats, especially if you have to combine your team or your boss to start using PWAs. So to take away, if it has 4 legs, it's a PWA. So what I mean, it's the same as before. It's a black box for the user. They don't care about the technology. They care about the UX. If we can provide that UX, for the user will be a native application. Doesn't matter how it looks, or basically it doesn't matter how it was built. What matters is how it was developed, or sorry, how it behaves. That's it. Thank you.